Hi, welcome back to another episode of A Day in the Life of a Digital Anthropologist. Today we have another exciting guest. I have Sydney Yeager. How are you, girl? How are you? How you been?
Doing really good. How about you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. I'm very excited about these episodes. Each episode keeps getting better and better, and I cannot stop getting enough of all these awesome digital anthropologists and how awesome are their daily lives.
So I'm really excited to be here and to tell you a little bit about, the day of my day in the life as a digital anthropologist.
Yes, can't wait. So, give us a little background of you and where you currently working.
Yeah. So I began, I guess, my career as a traditionally trained anthropologist. So in undergrad and for my master's, I did much more traditional anthropology, focusing on health and healing, looking at folk medicine and folk healers in regions such as the Ozarks in the United States and in Ireland. So it was very traditional, in-depth interviews, long-term participant observation in the field, coupled with, occasional surveys, right? So that was kind of where I got started. When I was transitioning from master's to PhD, I got involved with digital anthropology, really through the group that founded the American Anthropological Association's interest group, DANG, which is an interest group for digital anthropologists. And so that really got my curiosity going, hearing the very exciting things that people were already doing in digital anthropology. And that's the direction I went with my PhD. And so with my PhD, I looked at how social media and Facebook in particular were actually impacting actually changing the way people mourn a loved one who's passed, right? And so looking at new emerging, I guess, grief and mourning practices that we were seeing, looking at how people making social media posts about someone who passed away, how that actually impacted the user experience for other people who would see it, right? Including people who maybe learned about someone's passing from those social media posts, looking at interfamily conflicts that arose about who got to control the narrative around a person's death, right? And then looking at how certain design features, such as Facebook's, birthday reminders, its reminder to say, hey, reconnect with this person. Well, how do those kind of reminders that are built in to the design of Facebook to promote connectivity actually trigger these type of mourning responses? So if you get a reminder that says, hey, it's, Jimmy's birthday, but Jimmy's passed away, what emotions does that trigger and what actions does that actually initiate? And so that really got me thinking a lot more about UX and how the design of products can cause, actually lead to unintended behaviors and widespread cultural change, right? The fact that we were seeing Facebook becoming part of mourning, not just in the US, but around the world, right? I talked to people from Afghanistan who had disrupted the way their culture really thought the whole community should come together to tell the family. Well, if the family finds out first online, that's very disruptive, right? So seeing how that kind of change could happen. While I was finishing the PhD, I got an opportunity to work at a medtech startup. A fellow anthropologist was a product manager at this medtech startup, Preventus Solutions, and he was really excited to bring me in and let me learn more about product management. And so, through that, I really got involved in thinking about product discovery and the role that research can play in that. And so that was really kind of my foray into industry. From there, I've also worked at a fintech startup that looked at farmland investments. So people would buy partial shares of farmland together. And so that platform, AcreTrader, was another one of my first role as a UX researcher. And then I, from there, transitioned to Walmart, where I've been looking at the internal associate experiences. I was on the Global Tech Associate Digital Experience team for a while, for about a year and a half. And since then, I've transitioned to the corporate real estate team, where I'm focusing on workplace experience. So thinking about that bridge between the physical and digital, right? How does that impact our ability to collaborate with each other, our ability to be productive at work? How does it affect our overall well-being, right? And how does that influence our choices around things like how we get to work, what we do while we're at work, etc. And so I guess that's kind of been my trajectory to where I'm at today. Currently, my title is Senior Design Researcher for Workplace Experience Insights. And we've got an exciting program as Walmart's building out its new global headquarters in Bentonville. So we're building a whole new campus that people will start moving into in early January.
Wow, that's an impressive and very interesting way that you got into digital anthropology with the whole Facebook learning. And you have a quite awesome career path so far. So you're working at Walmart. So walk us to your typical day from waking up, and how does your morning routine looks like as a digital anthropologist?
Yeah. So I guess my current routine, right? Our corporate real estate team is on campus 5 days a week, right? So that definitely has a big influence. So I'm, I guess wake up, check email, get ready for work. And then my daughter and I commute from Fayetteville to Bentonville, which is on a good day a 30-minute drive. On a bad day, it could be 45 minutes, an hour maybe. So, we're in the car. I usually listen to audiobooks, maybe things that relate to the field. One I've been listening to lately is Nudge, right? They've done a new version of it. And so I've been listening to that. And then drop her off at the preschool that's on campus. That was one of the first buildings they opened. So that's nice that she actually gets to be very close to me and is getting a really high quality preschool education. And then it's a short drive to my office. And, when I get in, I check in with the other researchers on my team. We kind of, sync up about what we're trying to accomplish this week, what we're trying to accomplish today. And from there, I, spend the morning at my desk. If I have time, I'm checking email, but usually it's a pretty quick jump into either meetings for planning research or, getting down into writing proposals and conducting and analyzing the research, right? There's not one, it's funny because people ask about the day in the life a lot. There's not one set routine that I feel like as researchers, our day kind of can shift a lot with cycles, right? But for the most part, right, from, at least 8:30, maybe sometimes 8 o'clock till noon, we're getting a lot of work done in terms of big deliverables, in the afternoon. And I would say mornings are usually more collaborative. That's where we're going to have more meetings, more collaborative together with other researchers. In the afternoons, usually where I'm more focused on going back through, making sure the reports have, all the I's dotted, that we're really ready to share those. So you'll see more focused work in the afternoon is typically part of how my day flows.
Wow. You have such a like a not formal, regular day, which is, sometimes good. And then you get to all these, different aspects of, UX research and digital anthropology, within the same day, which is great, because sometimes routine is it can get tiring, but you have an awesome mix between, hands-on doing research and proposals and meetings and all that. So that's very cool, interesting. Should be
Yeah.
How do you keep your skills sharp and stay up to date with the latest developments in digital anthropology? Are there any specific practice or training you engage daily? I know you mentioned that you listen to some podcasts while you drive into work. Do you mind mentioning where are those, and what do you do to stay up to date?
Yeah. So I would say there's a variety of things I do, right? I am definitely listening to a wide range of audiobooks that are related to the field, right? So either they're anthropology books that have been put on audiobook, they're maybe related to more UX and design, or they're broader books about maybe the business context, right? Because for me in my role, it's very important that not only am I able to conduct the research and to interpret the findings, but I'm also able to develop those into insights that are actually actionable for the business. So I do have to do some reading into the business field as well, right, as part of that strategy piece. So, so I'm definitely reading very broadly across business, anthropology, and then more specifically to UX and design. And with my role on workplace experience, right, it's really unique in that I'm not just purely looking at digital products, right? So I'm having to think about digital product design, but I'm also having to think about the physical space design, how those two bridge together. And then also thinking about, things like policies and workplace culture and how those kind of pieces also fit into that overall experience design of the workplace experience. So I'm reading very broadly as far as that goes. So, sometimes I'll be listening to books on focus on the workplace. There was one called Office Shock that was really good to listen to recently. Sometimes I'm looking more, broadly at, what are the latest findings out of psychology and medical anthropology that can help us think about well-being and, how to help people feel connected in the workplace, right? So thinking through those things at a high level. Then I'm also listening to a lot of podcasts, right? So any podcast I can find on anthropology, I'd love to listen to those. Matt Arts actually has two podcasts. One of them is Anthro to UX, which is great. He has another one that's a product podcast. So both of those are good to listen to. But I also listen to things like Sapiens podcast, which is a broader anthropology. I want to stay connected to the findings across the field as well as, how they're being applied in industry. And then I also listen to a lot of podcasts related to product management. So I feel like product management helps me think through that more business strategy piece of my role. And so there's a podcast I really like called This is Product Management. It's a fun one that actually does similar to what you're doing, where she goes and she interviews different product leaders around the world. And so I feel like that's a really good mix as a digital anthropologist, that I'm, staying connected to the fields that are most related to the industry I'm in, right? So UX, design, product, and then also branching out broadly to business, because those are who my customers or stakeholders or clients are going to frame that are, right? The people that are requesting the research are definitely more on the business side or on the product side. And so making sure I can speak their language is another really important piece. And being able to do that through podcasts, through books is really helpful. I would say the other thing I do to keep my skills sharp and stay on top of the field is that I like to, whether it's in person or virtually, participate in conferences, right? So, I attended EPIC this fall virtually, but EPIC's a great conference to make sure that you're staying in touch with digital anthropologies in industry. I was actually a panelist speaker on a panel earlier this week for World Design Week in San Diego. And so that was a great opportunity to be part of what really was a roundtable discussion between two researchers that work in industry and two tech CEOs who are actually building AI research tools. And so we were able to talk about, okay, this is what they're building and where they see the industry going. And then from the research perspective, we were able to talk about, okay, this is how we're trying to apply it. Here are the challenges we're still finding. And so that, I think, being involved in those conversations as much as possible also helps me stay on top of the advances that we're seeing in different research tools, which I think is really important as well. And then I'll be at the AAA's in October. And so, again, staying in connection with anthropologists and the digital anthropologist through Dane is another important piece of how I stay up to date on what's happening with the field of anthropology.
Wow, you do a lot of things one day. I'm surprised that you find a lot of anthropology books on audio version. That's one of the things that I wish they would do more. Like for all the anthropologists out there writing books, please make sure you like include like an audio copy because sometimes like reading a physical copy or your digital is not feasible because you're doing so many things and audio it's such a blessing. Um,
I I absolutely agree. I wonder if there's I wonder if there's a bit of a bias that the books, the anthropology books that are the best well written are going to be the ones that get an audiobook, which might be interesting to think about, right? But there's an amazing applied anthropology book called Anthrovision that if you were, thinking about digital anthropology in industry, or just applied anthropology more broadly, is a really fantastic book. She gives tons and tons of real world examples of how anthropologists are making big impact in companies around the world. And so there are some books. I think it's those books that are maybe intended for either a broader audience than just anthropologists, or books that are intended for maybe more for anthropologists in the industry. Another great one is Sense Making. And it, is very much meant for anthropologists and researchers who have more of a qualitative bent to be able, it's actually providing great insights on how to explain the value of qualitative research, right? Why we need the qualitative data to go along with the big data, right? Another one is called thick data, and it's looking at that mix, right? That very thick, deep data that we get with qualitative research and how we need that to balance big data that we can have from data science, right? And so yeah, it's interesting. So maybe it is more books that are bent towards an industry perspective that are going to be the ones that end up with audiobooks. But I absolutely strongly encourage any anthropologist to work to get their book made available in audiobook. Personally, between the fact that I'm so busy and the fact that I also have dyslexia, having it on an audiobook is a huge benefit. It makes it much more likely for me to have the time to be able to fully read it. Yeah, and there's been some really interesting ones on even branching out further into physical anthropology. So a recent one I've been reading, it is called Eve, and it's looking at evolutionary history from a female perspective and talking about how female biology evolved and a lot of the medical pieces that have only begun to be researched about female anatomy. And so there's a lot of really important pieces of thinking about, okay, how do we, even things like the temperature in the office room, right? So apparently the standard temperature that most office buildings are set at is based on a study that was done in the 60s with only men. And it's based on men's kind of homeostasis, like where they're most comfortable at. Women don't run at the same temperature as men typically. And so it's really interesting that's like, they didn't even think that through, right? They just, it's like we've just accepted this is the setting, and so how do we make those kind of adjustments to actually fully make a very inclusive workforce, right? An inclusive workspace where everyone is going to feel like they belong, right? Regardless of gender and race and cultural background, right? And so thinking through those pieces really actually rolls up into the role of thinking through workplace experience.
those details really matter in the office space. How do you approach your research, and can you share any unique methodologies or tools that you use?
Yeah. So, and is this where you kind of want me to guide you through from beginning to end?
Yes, if you can, like if you can show us like a short project that you are currently working on.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess high level, the process, right? We start with a bit of discovery with our stakeholders, whoever's requesting the research. So previously, when I was more on the tech side, those research requests always came from product teams. Now that I'm on the corporate real estate side, I have most of my requests come from business units, right? So they're wanting to know, is the food we're providing on campus meeting everyone's expectations, right? Is the whole health and fitness center, making sure that everyone's really excited and happy to engage with that, right? So there's some business questions, and then there's also still product questions, right? Does the app work? Can people find what they need, etc. But we'll kick those off with conversations. Usually have a meeting, get them to fill out, to help us answer a couple of questions about what they're doing. So I have, for the intake process, I use a modified version of UX Canvas to make sure I really get to know the people requesting it and their needs. And then once we've decided on, what we think the best recommendations are, we develop a proposal. On my team, usually I'm developing the proposal, and then the other researchers, kind of review that with me. We make sure that we feel like it's ready to go. Then we bring that back to the stakeholders, get them to sign off on it, see if they have adjustments they'd like to make. Lately, we've been doing a lot of surveys. So usually with surveys, there is this extra piece of, designing the survey questions and then checking back with the stakeholders to make sure they align with their expectations. And then once that survey is ready to launch, right, we build it. We have an internal survey tool. We're also looking at using Qualtrics more long-term, right? So those are two tools that we have for surveys in particular. But for example, right, one of the things we've done in the past, I mentioned the whole health and fitness. We did a survey of the members, right? So that survey actually went out to all the members, which is a very large group of people, and we actually ended up with 1,000 responses, right? So really strong sample size, which is, it's great to have that level of data. When we bring it back in, right, now that we've got those 1,000 responses, we have to analyze it. So the majority of our questions on those surveys are usually quantitative questions, so we can do the quantitative analysis fairly quickly. Within, I'd say 2 days, we can have those analyzed and graphs built and everything. But then we always have at least one qualitative question we include, and analyzing that at scale has been a little of a challenge for our team, right? I think that's one of the most interesting things we've had to think through, because usually when you think about qualitative research, you're not doing qualitative research with a sample size of 1,000, right? Most qualitative studies are much smaller, 30, maybe 50, especially if it's interviews, right? So with 1,000, even though there is a word, I think a character limit of maybe 6,500 characters or something, people will tend to write a lot, right? And sometimes they may put 4 or 5 things that have been top of mind for a while into that text box. So we actually ended up pulling that into a tool called Dovetail, which is a fantastic tool for qualitative research. I think its best use case is for interviews. So if you have a recorded interview, it will actually, you upload it, it'll transcribe it for you, and then it'll actually kind of automatically try to highlight for you the pieces that it thinks are important. Of course, you would want to go in and review that and then start tagging it, saying, oh, okay, this is about, they're concerned about the value of what they're getting, or they're really excited about, the new space and how wonderful it is, right? So you can get those kind of positive and negative sentiments, and then also kind of those themes already starting to develop. So we've actually done that with the surveys too. And it's great that it automatically does sentiment analysis, telling you positive or negative sentiment. So you can really quickly get a quick high level view of, okay, the majority of the comments are positive. Maybe we focus first on the ones that are negative, right? When we're doing the analysis. But then we would go through and manually tag. And that process is still taking us about, for 1,000, it's still taking us almost a week, right, to go through, because, we're still doing it between meetings and such. But yeah, that gives us an ability to really have a lot of in-depth knowledge about what's in those quotes. And then from there, right, once we've got our quant and our qual data analyzed, then we're trying to think through, okay, what are the insights, right? And here, the trick is, it's not just presenting the analysis. You have to take it to the next level and say, okay, yes, maybe we put all the findings in the appendix, but what are the most important findings, right? What are the pieces where maybe we see the quant and qual data, merging to say something really important, right? So we'll focus on, okay, what are the positives? These are, things people are saying are great. Now maybe here's the negatives that you want to go back and try to improve on. And being able to really bring that quant and qual data together is an important piece for us. And to be able to quantify the qual data, which is something that Dovetail has really helped us with, right? So it helps our stakeholders know how many people are impacted, right? Because if you say, okay, this person was really happy about everything, but they're wishing there were blow dryers in the bathroom. Okay, well, if only 1 in 1,000 people say they want blow dryers in the bathroom, maybe that's not a big deal. But, if 20 people say something else, right, let's go check that out and figure out what we can do. So really helping us think about, where the most, which insights are going to give us the most impact for the overall experience, and actually help the most people. So that's kind of a big piece of how we've been doing it. And one of the great things about the team that I'm on is that we also are very connected to the data science team, and we can also pull in data that they have, big data, right, on things like how many people are actually going to the whole health and fitness center, what are the peak hours. So if people say, I want it to stay open later, we can see, oh yeah, there's still a lot of high traffic on, Thursday night, and maybe you're closing too early. If you open another hour later, people may have more time to enjoy the facilities. So we're able to couple those two pieces together, and I think that actually makes it really powerful as well.
Wow. That gives us a very good insight to what it what it means to your job. How do you interact with online communities, and how what role does these communities play in your research?
So in terms of online communities, considering my research is primarily internally focused, right? So so far, the majority of projects we've done are focused on associates. I would say the rare exceptions are things like the Whole Health and Fitness Center that I mentioned. And there's also we're also doing some research with the Child Care Center. So in those cases, we're talking to associates and their family members, right? So, if you're an associate, you can be a member of the Whole Health and Fitness Center, and so can your whole family. So we might also interview, say, adult dependents or spouses, right, partners, other people in the household. With the Child Care Center, right, one parent is always going to be an associate, but the other one likely won't, right? So there'll be, family members that we're including. Eventually, we will also do research on people who are visiting the campus, right? So non-associates that come to the new campus once it's fully open. But right now, we're not doing as much of that kind of community engagement and visitor external research, right? So I say that to say, since our focus is more internal, there are really two main platforms that are online communities that I would say we have access to that relate to associates. One is Workplace, which is it's an internal social media. It's actually something that Meta or Facebook, right, created as a platform that corporations can offer as a social media platform inside their business. And so on that space, you'll see people post announcements. Say, for example, they might announce some new piece of the campus that's going to open. Grand opening for the Whole Health and Fitness Center, right? So we can see comments people make. So we're hearing, what people's reaction is real time. So in that, it's kind of more observing, some social listening, seeing what people are saying. The other space that I would say has an online community of associates that's worth considering, regardless of which focus your project is on, is Reddit. It's really interesting that there is basically, I guess, a Walmart subreddit where associates are completely anonymous and talking to one another about their experience. And so I feel like in that space, because it is very anonymous. It's associates from all over the world, right? Some corporate, some store associates, right? It's a real mixture of people, and I think they're able to, because of the anonymity, they feel able to be maybe a little more frank than they would be in other spaces. I think it's actually a really interesting place to look and see what people are saying, right? So, how are associates reacting to different features of the new campus? What are people saying? What things are they asking? I think that tells us a bit about kind of the internal brand reputation, right? And it's also a place you could kind of monitor, like, people are complaining about the Wi-Fi and asking each other, is it all, is your Wi-Fi also having issues, right? So then that might be a signal, hey, there's something going on where Wi-Fi is affecting productivity, right? Just for an example. So I think it's a good place to occasionally monitor and just kind of see, are there issues? What are people actually saying when they have that ability to be a little more anonymous about about what's being put out there. So that's another, I would say, online community that I think has been really, really good to kind of just keep an eye on. Yeah.
Wow. I didn't realize that, Reddit was such a powerful, I knew it was like very interesting and powerful, but I didn't realize that, it has such a broad, it's like a fields in there that get to, because Reddit is very like anonymous, so you have the freedom to really express yourself without fear that somebody is going to be watching and then kind of do it.
Right. Yeah. I think it's like very different than what you would say on Facebook,
yeah.
Right? Which is going to be very attached to who you are as your personal identity and everything, and like you don't know if maybe your boss can see it, right? So I feel like on Reddit they're able to talk a little more openly about things.
Yeah. What is some of the biggest challenge that you face and you at work? How do you overcome them? As you as an anthropologist, just you have any?
Yeah. So let's see. There are some challenges, like the example with the survey, right? That I was saying, like we got 1,000 responses. There was another one this summer where we got 2,000 responses. Again, from a quantitative standpoint, you're not really, you don't really want 2,000 responses to analyze. Like it feels like a lot. So thinking about how do we leverage the right tools to make it manageable, right? To balance our professional desire to be very rigorous and confident in the data and analysis we present, with the equally important business need to get those insights to people quickly, right? So one of the biggest, complaints you'll hear from both product and business about research, very broadly speaking, is the speed of our work, right? An academic anthropologist can take a year to go get a PhD and, do a year's worth of research to get their PhD in dissertation, right? They could take a sabbatical for, an entire semester and go do a new study, right? We're, in a lot of cases, we are delivering research that enables business leaders to make decisions, and sometimes they need to make those decisions today, right? So, they're like, okay, I need to know now. One of the first projects I worked on when I came to Walmart, which is on a different team that I'm on now, right? But it was my second week with Walmart, and my first week actually in the office. I think it was my first day in the office. We needed to gather research on the on-campus tech support, right? So the question was, do associates really need they call them tech bars, but like, do they really need these on-site tech support spaces in every building? Are people comfortable if they're in every other building, right? Like, how many spaces do we need? And so what we did is we actually set up near those, like at those tech spots, tech support spots, we observed people in the spaces. We talked to people as they're leaving, right? We did quick interviews with people as they were leaving. And we did this at 3 different sites across the across the current campus, and compile that information very quickly. But literally from getting the request late one afternoon to delivering the insights, this was a 48-hour turnaround of, so we did 20 interviews and on-site observation and delivered answers to questions people needed to know to be able to make decisions about, how many of these new tech support locations were going to go into the new campus. In that kind of case, right, even if you have a large research team with multiple researchers supporting you, that kind of turnaround can be a really big challenge, right? So you have to think through, what methods are agile enough but still rigorous. And, and so one of the things that, especially now that I'm on the corporate real estate team, there is this strong push from leaders. They really do want the bigger numbers, right? They want to know it's representative, even, it's statistically representative, even if it is qualitative, right? Even if it is interviews, they want to feel very confident that information is representative of the whole population, right? We have thousands of employees locally here in Bentonville, and even more around the world, right? So we want to make sure that we're getting a strong sample. And so that need to be both fast, but have that high rigorous data. I think balancing those two is a big challenge. And every time it's something that you're going to negotiate really early on in those early intake conversations with the business about what's the best approach, what's our target sample size, and that sort of thing. So they have to be really planned well to make sure that we're balancing those two.
Yeah, that's quite the interesting path that you have to create for. What do you find the most rewarding about your role as a digital anthropologist?
Yeah. So I will definitely say it's really 2 parts. So one, I'd say the first thing, and this actually really aligns with Walmart's focus on the associates, is really that I find when you interview associates and you're able to make sure their voice is heard, and that is carried out, that that you're able to carry that voice into decision making, right? That they not only they feel heard and they know they're actually able to impact the long-term decisions. That gives them a very strong positive feeling, right? And one of the quotes we had from someone about this from about a year and a half ago, we were talking to them about this, like, what does it mean to know that leadership is is taking your voice into account, and that's influencing decision making. And this person said, that means everything. To know that to know that leadership are actually listening, it means everything to me. And to know that is store associates, corporate associates, everyone, hourly associates, everyone's voices being included in the decisions and directions we're going, and that we're trying to improve the overall experience, right? To make being at work a better experience, and to make it a more, a better balance of work-life balance, right? I think that is really meaningful to me, and being able to be the person that ensures that associates' voices are heard. I feel really passionate about that. I would say the other thing, and this is maybe more of the it's exciting, dopamine, but to see, where I've given recommendations based off of the research I've done, and those recommendations have actually been followed. And, here's this update and new product that's actually out in the real world being used, or here are changes to the physical spaces on campus based off, what we found. That's really exciting to see those very real world impacts of the research we did, right? To see that, okay, people have, they've made changes based off what we found. And now people's lives are going to be a little bit easier, right? They're going to be a little bit better. Knowing that those very real impacts are coming out of the research, I think means a lot to me too. And it's very exciting to see that happen real time.
Yeah, that's nice. Yeah, you get to see all those comments into like reality matter, like that actually is happening. What would be how do you maintain a work-life balance in the field that is so deeply connected to the digital world?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like that is the question our whole generation is struggling, the whole world is struggling with right now, especially with, it's been kind of a weird couple of years, right? We had the pandemic, everyone was remote for a while. Now everyone's back in person, like there's been a lot of change, a lot of things happening. And I've been on different teams that have been set up very different ways, right? So when I first got started with the med tech company, it was purely remote because it was in the heart of the pandemic, right? The first team I was on here at Walmart, it was part of global tech, and we were coming in, it was hybrid, right? We were in the office 2 days a week. We were remote 3 days a week. Some of our team was fully remote. Our team in Dallas only went in 1 day a week. Like there was a lot of it was, everybody was kind of doing something different. And I actually feel like that may have been the hardest was this like, okay, we're very spread out. Everyone's doing something different. We're not really aligned and we're not all on the same time zone. So that was a lot to juggle. Right. And so it definitely there are definitely times where it bleeds in to your private life, right? Or to your private time, right? Hours. So, I would say the previous team I was on and the startups where we did have that more hybrid experience or fully remote experience, that like end of day boundary was so hard to keep, right? Now, usually people, even if they sent you an email at 6 a.m., they weren't expecting you to necessarily respond until 8, right? You had some grace. But in the evening, it seems like that boundary was so hard to keep. And so there were times where, the hours ran in 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 o'clock. That one thing where I told you we had to get it done in like a 24-hour turnaround, we had our entire team working until 10. That's not great. That's not something you want to make a norm for your team, right? And that's not going to give you the healthy work-life balance. The thing that has surprised me the most about transitioning to the corporate real estate team, where we are expected to be in the office 5 days a week, I was really 5 days a week? I was not super on board with the 5 days a week. I was like, okay, I'll do it, but do I have to? But one of the things that surprised me is it's easier to make that work-life balance boundary because you can say, I'm done for the day. You can shut your laptop and leave your laptop on the desk and not feel responsible for answering emails or doing more work after you've left for the day, right? That's actually been really empowering, right? And so since I've started on this new team, I've been, and that's only possible because of my leadership, right? Because my manager, the leaders I work with also respect that, right? You could be on a team where that's not true. But, and my current manager has even told me, right? He's like, I don't want to see you working after 6 ever, right? Like, he's like, we should be setting reasonable deadlines so that doesn't happen, that doesn't need to happen, right? And I feel like that's actually a really great, so that combination of the leadership being fully on board with supporting work-life balance, and some of that comes from them needing to have work-life balance, they need to have work-life balance too, right? So them having that strong support, and then also the physicality of, okay, I've left, right? I was at work, I did my job, I did a lot of work during that time, but now I'm done, right? I think that helps set a clear mental boundary, and that's not something I thought it's something that surprised me, right? It's not something I would have thought would have been actually a benefit of being back full time, being back 5 days a week in the office. But, and coming from academia, it's way easy to overwork yourself, right? Anyone that's gone through grad school, like I feel like we're kind of trained to overwork to a degree. And so feeling like it's okay to say I'm done with work for the day is a really big, a really, really nice thing to have, right? Especially for, for myself, for my health, and for my family.
Right. Yeah. No. And then like when I'm coming from the freelance, it's a completely different because you can be
Yeah.
working 11 p.m., which would be totally
Right.
fine. But yeah. And
Yeah.
this question I included it because when you like do your research and for people who wants to be in the field thinking about it, when you really like research it, there is no way to base yourself with, and it has to do with the compensation. What can someone expect in terms of compensation when it's starting out in the digital anthropology field, and how does that change with experience?
Okay. So I will say so there's probably a couple things. I would say experience and level of education are going to definitely factor into compensation, right? Into where you start. So there are multiple roles that a digital anthropologist could do very easily, very well. So any research role, of course, is an obvious thing that you might expect a digital anthropologist to take on. I also think digital anthropologists make stellar product managers, program managers. There's a range of things, right? So probably market research as well as UX design research type jobs. So there is a range, but I will say if you were making a typical US salary of a visiting professor and you switch to UX, it's easily gonna double, maybe triple what you were earning, right? So it's a very big difference between academic versus industry. So starting out, if you're in an internship position, that's going to be lower pay, but I would expect that to only last for 6 months or less, right? Before you move up. And by lower pay, I'm still going to get paid, right? Maybe I don't know what it is now. I'll just be open about what my internship pay was in 2020. So in 2020, when I was a product management intern, I was getting $25 an hour. I would assume it's more than that now, but that's like what I would say is the lowest threshold of what you would expect. Now, right, junior researchers may start as low as high 80 to 90,000 for, like a junior. I've never worked in industry before. Maybe I have an undergrad degree, or maybe I have a master's, but this is my first job and I'm trying to get going, right? But I think it will be very easy for people that have a background in anthropology, once they've developed that experience, to get across the six-figure barrier. And it also varies regionally, right? Cost of living is different, and so people will literally pay you, even if you're working in the same company, they will pay you differently in Arkansas versus California. But I would still expect, right, that, let's say California is a good range, that your total comp is above 150 if if you've been in the field for a little while, kind of mid-career. That you'll be making above 150,000. I've heard people say total comp of 200,000 if you've got a PhD and you're already at senior. That's in California money, right? That is not going to be the same translated into Arkansas. But the fact that those numbers, like compared to, say, a visiting professor with a PhD and the same kind of experience, would probably be starting at about 60,000. 60,000 in the United States. That's a massive difference that we're talking about there. Yeah.
And then
and I would say freelance, and you'll probably know more about this than I do. Freelance, I'm thinking it's somewhere between $50 and $75 an hour. Is that what you've seen?
Yeah, yeah. It varies on the if you don't like research, marketing research, UX research. If you're doing more in the cyber ethical side advising, like I specialize, it could be a little bit more because you have both
right, you're kind of like pulling together two different
roles
disciplines.
at
Yeah.
one, like being the anthropological researcher also, and but also you have the training of AI, data, and ethical kind of. But yeah, I mean it's a good number to people have in mind if they decide to do the transition from academics to apply anthropology, or if they're interested in the field, because it helps. You can make yourself, and you're not like outselling yourself, or you just like charging less. You should be what you deserve.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
And then the other question has to be with ethical considerations. How do you navigate the ethical challenges that arise on digital anthropology when, especially dealing with sensitive online communities of data? You can give us an example from your personal research, what you did for your like thesis on Facebook and morning, or you can give us like an example from Walmart or what are you doing right now if you feel comfortable.
Okay. So let me make sure I understand the question. So you're wanting to know about ethical dilemmas based off of the data that I've collected specifically, or just broader ethical dilemmas that may occur?
Yeah, like we were talking earlier, like the Reddit situation that people feel more have the freedom to talk like freely because they're not being watched.
Yeah.
When you guys are like observing that to use it to create a better product or environment, obviously, what is the approach you guys take? Like, do you guys introduce, say, hey, this is the Team Homer, we are just checking this for better products, or you just like monitor? And then because this being this dilemma in the industry that says like how do you approach this scenario, or this kind of research which is virtually where people they don't know that there's another anthropologist or researcher currently observing, and then when you use that data, because it could go two ways. You either introduce yourself to the monitor saying we're gonna be doing this kind of research, or you just like observe and gather the
Yeah,
data
I understand what you're asking now. Yeah, yeah, I understand now. Okay, so and then I have other ethical ones that I can tell you, but specifically to what you're asking about, right? We'll start with my dissertation because that's where I developed my stance. So my dissertation research was on Facebook. I've had a Facebook account since 2005, so now it's 19 years. And my entire journey of becoming an anthropologist is very public on my Facebook account, right? But then it's like, what data can I collect? What's ethical? What are the rules, right? So I actually had an incredible opportunity to discuss this question with Tom Bolstorff. So he wrote Coming of Age in Second Life, and he's one of the leading founders of digital anthropology. So his stance that he shared with me was that when you're in a very public community like Facebook, everyone is very aware that the things they're posting are going out into the public sphere, right? I would say Facebook, Twitter, right? Any of those kind of very open places. There are other online communities that are much more close, right? There are even Facebook groups, for example, that to get membership into that group, you have to prove that you're part of, whatever special community, and they have a lot of rules, right? Those places would be considered much more private. But what post I'm making in a very public space would be considered different. So that kind of public-private line is really plays into how I make the decision about, whether I have to ask permission, how I announce myself, right, etc. So, and that really came out of that conversation with Tom. So, for me, for example, on Facebook, like I said, my whole journey to becoming an anthropologist was very publicly there. One of the things I did while I was in the active stage of collecting data is that I did make posts updating everyone on my dissertation, right? That I'm in the process of working on my dissertation. Right now, I've built a survey, da 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 da. Right now, I'm collecting Facebook posts to analyze. Right now, I'm doing interviews, right? So I kept that whole journey like very publicly documented in my post, so that anyone that was interested could see what was going on, right? So that's one part of it. The other part of it is the way I lined out my research. I actually first did a survey at the end, and that went very public, and at the end asked for volunteers for interviews. I selected a sample of those people to interview, right? And then when I came to actually analyzing the data, I analyzed posts by those people and posts that were made on their deceased loved one's profile, right? So it was all in connection to the people that I'd actually talked to. They were very aware I was going to do that research. So because who I'd already got informed consent of, those are the people whose post I was analyzing, if that makes sense. That said, someone could have commented on their post and they could not know that it was going to be analyzed, right? But the other piece is that I anonymized all of this data, right? Which is very standard ethical practice for anthropologists. So I anonymized the survey data, I anonymized the interview data, and I anonymized the post data. So there's no Mary Jones said da da da, right? We're not putting that on, if the actual post was put anywhere inside the dissertation or any presentations, I redacted the name, I redacted the picture, right? For all of the people who were kind of key players and the narratives that I included, they all got pseudonyms, and I put those pseudonyms over their post, so you would know that, okay, well, I've got this story about, the grieving experience of Mary Jones. That's a pseudonym, that's not her real name, and here's the post she made, right? So you could see those things in connection and context, but they're all being done under a pseudonym. So all of it was kept anonymous. So that was one piece. The other piece was being very public about being an anthropologist. So that's the dissertation portion of it, right? Is that's kind of how I approached it for the dissertation. So in business, it's interesting about how research is done. So to some extent, for example, let's start with the investment platform, right? The Acre Trader, the investment platform I worked on, when I very first got started, I was building the UX research org for that team. I went and spoke with legal counsel, and they advised, that because of the way the terms of service were written, all of the customers had already given some level of consent about us analyzing the data. So then the consent on that really came on the one-on-one interviews, right? When I reached out to interview, I let them know what we were doing. Before we started the interview and started recording, I got informed consent, right? So then in that case, it's at the point of contact that you're getting additional informed consent, right? But that's in a very, that's very private information being shared in an interview, right? And for them, it was very important, again, that their data was kept anonymized, that their name and image wasn't being used anywhere. Anything that might be identifiable, say they tell the story of the company they founded, right? We don't want that company's name somehow getting attached to this data either, right? So you have to think through not just de-identifying the person, but also de-identifying the stories they share, right? If there's anything that could reveal their identity or impact, like we wouldn't want it to somehow impact their business, right? For example. So, and that piece, it was very much like that. Now, looking at maybe, LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram posts that our team had made and customers had responded to, those are very public, and I think they know that if you're responding to a post a company's made, that the company's going to read it, right? That there is that expectation. So in that case, I wasn't announcing, oh, hey, I'm an anthropologist in the comments or something like that. That's how I handled that. So like that was more social listening. Hey, we're just seeing what people have to say. At Walmart, right, when we're working internally with associates, again, whether it's a survey or an interview, we always want to ask for consent, right? Get them to say, this is voluntary, you don't have to participate, and if you do, we'll keep your information. We're going to anonymize the data. It will not be in any way used against you, right? There's not going to be any kind of, we're going to keep it anonymous enough that there won't be any retaliation or anything like that, that we just want you to be open and honest. So very similar things that you might say in a traditional anthropology interview as well, right? There are anthropologists doing research in war-torn countries or conflict zones that very much similarly have to make similar, promises and protect the data in similar ways. I would say the one piece that, thinking about Reddit and thinking about the fact that Reddit, they're already anonymous on Reddit. How is that information being used? So when I'm using that, I'm looking at, are there trends in what we're seeing people talk about that we may need to go do more research on, right? Rather than using that as quotes we're going to share directly, or data we're going to analyze in a more in-depth way. It's more, hey, these are topics people are concerned about, as a way to kind of keep a almost like a thermostat, like, what's the mood, right? What's the, the general sentiment and reaction to maybe a new announcement that's come out, or, what are the things that people are having tech frustrations around, right? That sort of thing. So in that case, I think people are very aware. I think that's why they're doing it in an anonymous way to start with, right? They're very aware Walmart could be watching or whatever, right? But for me, I'm not using it to report it back directly to anyone, if that makes sense, right? It's more of a guiding, being used as kind of like a guiding indicator of things that we might want to do research on.
Yeah, I mean, definitely everybody knows when you go these public sightings that whatever you say is going to be probably read by someone who works at that place or is of the company, and they're going to use that data to make those changes that people are requesting,
Yeah. For private groups, so private Facebook groups were a piece of my dissertation. There, in particular, I was looking at mourning, and there were groups that were specifically set up as support groups, right, for people who would kind of fit certain demographics, say mothers who had lost a child, right, or really young widows, or widows of war veterans, right? Like, they're very like niche communities around a very shared, like very specific shared experience. Some of them are around, like parents who had a child that had very specific childhood illness that passed away, right? So like, it's very, very specific groups. And in those cases, I did do a kind of overarching survey of, what are all the groups that I could find at the time that exist, what are their titles, who are they serving? And then I reached out to the admins, and I said, gave a little introduction of, this is who I am, this is the research I'm doing. If you're willing to talk to me, I'd love to talk to you. If you think it would be appropriate, I'd love to join the group and observe and reach out to people. But if you think that's inappropriate or going to cause any distress, I won't, and I would be happy to talk to you instead, right? And that got a mix of responses, and I think that's to be expected, right? Several groups said, it's not really appropriate for you to join the group because the group is very selective and only for the people who've had this experience. But many more, we also had many moderators or admins that responded either by saying, I'm happy to answer your questions in chat, or I'm happy to do an interview, right? And so interviewing them actually worked out really well. And then in the few groups that were open to me joining, it was a really important piece that I wanted to even just to be able to say, this is what's going on in these groups, right? That they are very, and to me, they're very important critical groups, that they serve as support groups. And specifically, the people most helped by them are people who live in areas where they don't have access to the same level of psychological care you might expect in larger cities, right? So there very much might not be any type of bereavement support group within an hour's drive of where they live, within 2 hours drive of where they live. And so the fact that people in rural areas were able to leverage this as a resource was huge. There were also a few specialty cases where, for example, a middle schooler passed away, and that middle school banded together and had that Facebook group to support each other. And the counselor was present there to support the kids. A few of the teachers and admins, were there to support them too. But it was really all about the kids supporting each other. And so there were some unique things that showed up. But to see, it's kind of like so much of what we see with social media can be so negative and harmful. We really needed to be able to tell that story of how there were these spaces that were very private, that were providing a positive good to the people who were able to use them. And one of the people that I interviewed as part of the work, this had been really key to her grief experience, is being part of those groups, being supported by them, and then reaching a point in her own grief where she was able to kind of turn around and help the people who had more recently lost someone, right? And that idea that she's like, I can take this really horrible thing that happened in my life and help other people who were going through that same experience. That was really key to her, and the story that she was able to tell about her experience. And so we do, there are really important private communities that we want to include as well, but we have to think about the right way of approaching them, and I think it really reminds me of old school anthropology, right? You go to the village elders, so you go to the group admins, right? You talk to the leaders of the group, and you are very upfront and honest about who you are and why you're there, right? And I think people respond to that authenticity, right? They want to know that you're not just there undercover pretending and faking out like you're, a member of, especially at such a vulnerable group, right? And I think in that way, it's very important to have that kind of public-private distinction in how you approach online communities.
That is true. That's true. I'm working on something that has to do with YouTube, nothing to do with, that sensible topic, but, just interesting. And as someone who consumes content, just I don't understand why, people are being drawn to a specific video, walking in New York City. Especially during the pandemic, it was very interesting to see all kinds of people. Why were they drawn into watching that, the kind of topic? But yeah, it's pretty interesting. What is the best advice you have received that has helped you in your career? And what is the advice would you give to someone who's interested in digital anthropology or becoming a digital anthropologist?
Yeah. So, it's interesting. I think the best practical advice that I received while I was still, I was still working on my PhD. I was kind of maybe at the beginning of my dissertation research, and the person that I was talking to had just graduated recently, right? And her advice was that you want to make sure you've got some type of industry experience before you graduate with the PhD. That it's really important, even if it's a volunteer thing, even if it's an internship, even if it's a one-off project, right? That you do over the summer, right? It doesn't necessarily matter what it is. It's that you have to have some type of experience that you can show you were able to work outside of the academic setting as someone with a PhD, because that's really where people trying to make that transition post-PhD can struggle. That, it's like, okay, well, we know you're really smart and we know you can do research, but can you translate that to something meaningful for the business? Can you work in a business environment? Can you adapt? And so if you can make sure that was to make sure you get industry experience before you finish the PhD, because the biggest obstacle that anthropologists with a PhD face when they're trying to go into industry is people not being sure if they will adapt well to the business environment. They're not sure they're serious about wanting to go into industry, and they're not sure, they know people like, okay, you've got a PhD, you're really smart, you can clearly do research, but can you turn what you found into things that the business can use to actually make decisions, right? And into things that are meaningful for the business. And so her advice was make sure, whether it's volunteer, whether it's an internship, or maybe some kind of contract work, make sure you get some practical industry experience prior to graduation. And I've never heard anyone else say that, but I think it's very, very true. I was, with that advice in mind, I was actively looking for something, and then had that great opportunity to have the internship in product management, which I found through, the person that was the hiring manager posting it on a design anthropology listserv, right? So having that kind of opportunity, one, to work with a leader who is an anthropologist was amazing, but also to have that experience helped me get the future roles. So it's kind of that you've got to have some experience to get in the door, that piece of it. And so I think that's really important if you're trying to start your career, especially if you're coming from a master's or PhD program. Mm-hmm. I think that piece of it can be really important.
That's that's an excellent advice, specifically, like, if you want to just like finish your PhD or your schooling and then hit the ground running. Right. And one of the last question is, what do you see the digital anthropology field in 5 to 10 years?
Yeah. So, first of all, I will say within 5 to 10 years, I think the field of anthropology as a whole will have realized to do anthropology of any contemporary group, you have to consider digital anthropology, right? When we very first got started with Dang, one of the things we were kind of fighting or pushing back against was this assumption that there was like the real world that was physical and tangible, and the virtual world that was kind of fake, right? It's kind of like people's imagination or some kind of shared imagination, right? I think, and so one of the things we tackled early on was that no one experiences it that way, right? And so we talked about this idea of bridging the digital and physical divide. You'll hear people in industry sometimes use the word phygital now as that, crossover, right? But even back in like 2012, 13, right, we were able to pull together a whole panel of people that were working on things like, someone actively at a protest, a very physical in-person protest, but it's all being live tweeted, right? So like there's this digital component to everything. And now that's true of all aspects of our lives, right? It's true of our work, it's true of our play, it's true of how we socialize with each other, it's true of how young people find each other for dates, right? It's the whole world, right? And I think regardless of what cultural group you're studying around the world, everyone has this digital aspect of their life. And so really that idea that digital becomes so pervasive that it's in all types of cultural anthropology, right? That's kind of where I see us getting. The fact that it's taking so long makes people in other fields and in the industry kind of look at me like, what? You have like 2012, you're still convincing them that digital is real? Like 2024, you're still having to argue that everyone needs to include digital in all of their studies. So I think that's the transition on the academic side. I think the other side is how it's being applied, right? And I would love to see digital anthropology being included everywhere. We've got data scientists, we have qualitative researchers working together, very much like the program I'm describing that we're building here at Walmart, where we've got qualitative insights and we've got our data science team, and we're coming together to understand, okay, we see an anomaly in the data science. Let's send in qualitative research to find out why, right? Let's understand that human experience piece of it. and vice versa, right? Hey, we're seeing something, people are reporting something unusual. What's actually happening? What's the difference between perception and maybe what our sensors are telling us? Everyone's cold. What's going on, right?
Right.
So really trying to build those two things, build a world where people understand we need both of those, right? We need data scientists, but we also need digital anthropologists to be able to work, to see the full picture, to see the holistic picture of what's going on. And for that, I think we need lots of digital anthropologists going into industry, going into the public sector, so we have them working in governments. And we are seeing that increasingly, right? Every year I'm getting to meet more and more people that are taking on those roles. And it's really exciting to see. And I think, I had the opportunity in my previous team here at Walmart to work on a team with two other digital anthropologists at Walmart, right?
Wow.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
And so I think just the fact that there are more and more of us going into that field. The other thing is I would expect to see that in industry, there is not an expectation that you have to have a PhD to be a digital anthropologist, right? One of the two anthropologists I mentioned had her master's. She was incredible. She's actually now gone on to do work with a medical nonprofit group as a digital anthropologist, right? So the fact that we can see, anthropologists coming in with a variety of fields. I've worked with some that have, undergrad degrees in anthropology, but are able to apply that to UX really well. You don't have to have a PhD to be able to do industry research. Mm-hmm. There's different roles that you might fit in. There are different things, depending on what you're doing. But you can learn so much in industry once you're, getting hands-on experience, especially if you have a good mentor. Because in industry, we're doing, at least every quarter, we're doing a dissertation worth of research, right? So you're going to get so much practical hands-on experience that you're going to be able to really excel and build your more senior expertise over time. In that very practical, hands-on way.
That is an excellent advice, and yeah, I totally agree. Again, I don't have PhD and a master's, and I can assert to that you don't need those titles. If you want to get them, yeah, sure, but you don't need it to be able to succeed in life. If that's what you choose to not to do. Well, thank you so much. And our last question is after a long day of navigating online, how do you unwind, and what do you do to put yourself in a mode of Zen?
Yeah. So after my long day of work, right, I get in traffic, which is not part of the moment of Zen. No. So again, I pick up my daughter at preschool, which is very close by, right, which does bring joy to that traffic because I'm able to actually have her. She's singing songs to me on our way home, which is really cute. She's 3.5. So she'll sing Mr. Sun. I don't know. She's really cute. But after we get home, right, it's really just family time. It's the fact that I am able, like I said, to shut the laptop and be done for the day. Mm-hmm. And when I arrive home, it's focused on me and my husband getting to chat with each other about how our days have gone, getting to spend time with the kids, playing games. Relaxing, maybe watching. We love mysteries, so we like to watch different mystery shows. But that just being able to unwind and relax is a big part of it. And then I usually listen to an audiobook as I go to sleep. And we use a lot of binaural beats to help with our sleep because we do have a little trouble falling asleep in my house. But yeah, so that's it's pretty much a pretty full day. I feel like. And the weekends are all about family and trying to enjoy the beautiful outdoors because we are in the Ozarks. So there are plenty of mountains to hike and rivers and lakes to play in. And so we're trying to actually achieve that work-life balance.
Wow, you have such a great journey and such a interesting career in the digital anthropology or UX research. I'm really glad we got to talk to, and I know we're friends after these podcasts. And if anybody wants to get in touch with you, what would be the best? Your social media, your email, or through LinkedIn?
Yeah. So my primary personal email is very simply Sydney Yeager at gmail.com. lucked out to get that. I think in my junior or senior year of college, I was like, oh, I really need one that sounds more professional than the one I had from high school. So you can still reach me there. I'm on LinkedIn, and again, you can search for Sydney Yeager. I think it'll say like Dr. Sydney Yeager, Sydney Yeager PhD, so you can find me easily. But yeah, I'm there. I am on Twitter. My Twitter handle is Sli-Fi, which is again like I've been doing social media for a long time, so that's just my high school college Twitter name. But yeah, so you can find me on Twitter. You can find me on LinkedIn, and you can email me if you want to reach out to learn more about what I'm doing and how if people are interested in mentorship. I'm open to talking to people early in their careers.
Awesome. That's great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. I know you have a busy schedule ahead of you. But yeah, thank you so much, and looking forward to do part 2 of this interview.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.